Thank you for being with us today. Can you start by telling me when and where you were born?
I was born in New York City on August 1st, 1938.
And what did your father do in New York?
Um, for most of his working life, he owned and operated parking garages, including one that was directly across the street from the main entrance to the Yankee Stadium in the glory days of the Yankees, the 40s, 50s, 60s.
How did it come about that you went in the service? Were you drafted or enlisted?
Well, I was in an era of what was called the Berry Plan, capital B, Berry. Frank Berry was, he had various governmental employment in the Department of Defense. I think he became an undersecretary at one point. Somewhere shortly after or during the Korean War, because it was difficult to staff medical organizations within the service, this plan came about. And what it required was that all physicians, and I think dentists as well, had a 6-year obligation to the military. 2 years of which I chose to do active service. So you were in the reserve as a physician. You were given a commission. And so you could serve either at the end of your internship, 1 year of residency, or after your residency. And I chose to do it immediately after my internship.
So you went in right after.
1 year after medical school.
Where'd you go to medical school?
Went to medical school in New York at the Downstate Medical Center, which is part of the state university system.
Is that Berry Plan still alive today?
No, it went out of effect in the 70s, I think the mid-70s.
Sounds like a beneficial plan for both people, for both sides.
Well, I don't know, of course, prior to that, I don't know what the difficulties were in getting physicians and dentists to serve. I have no idea. That was after the Second World War and into the Korean War. But obviously, that was the motivation, and they were able to do it. And so they were able to staff all of the needs of the military hospitals.
Yeah, it makes too much sense to
It did.
to be stopped anyway. So after medical school, where were you sworn in at? In New York City then?
No, I don't remember where I was sworn in. It was probably in Brooklyn somewhere, because that's where I was in medical school. And the commission occurred as I was completing my internship and getting ready to go into the service.
You went in by yourself, or did you have your doctor friends with you?
No, I was, some of my colleagues from medical school came with me to basic training.
Where'd you go to basic training?
Medical Field Service School in Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas.
Right. Did you get a choice of the service of the Army? You chose the Army.
Well, I chose the Army kind of under personal duress. I really wanted to go into the Navy, but my wife was concerned that I would be away for a prolonged period of time. Well, it turned out that I was away for a prolonged period of time anyway. But because of that, I chose the Army.
Okay. So you're at Fort Sam Houston. Was that about 8 weeks or so, or
4 weeks?
4 weeks.
It seemed like a year.
Yeah, you don't forget those experiences.
It was July. It was hot in Texas, in the desert.
Then you go to advanced training there also?
No.
Okay. Well, let's go back to basic a little bit. Any restrictions or rules that you found hard to live with?
No. The only really exciting part of it was a week of that month we were off to Camp Bullis for I guess you could consider it combat basic, and it was basic, but there were infiltration courses with ammunition and explosions and the fun stuff like that.
Okay. Nothing else sticks in your mind? The food, the barracks?
We didn't live on post. We lived off. There were a few of us that knew each other. We rented an apartment for a month. and it was okay. I mean, I think trying to train 1,000 doctors and dentists, all of whom have captain's bars on, and the lieutenants
Yeah, you're
were trying to train us how to salute, where to put the latrines, and so on and so forth was, uh,
you had an elite basic training compared to the average guy going in.
absolutely.
You had an elite basic training, and you came out obviously with a doctor. Any medical specialty that you had, or
At
any
that time,
special?
I had done an internship in surgery, and so I was bound for a surgical career. We had a nice experience there. We lived there for a year.
You were married during this time.
We were married. During that year, we adopted our first child, our daughter. I was working primarily in the emergency room at the Ireland Army Hospital. Fort Knox at that time was probably the second biggest city in Kentucky. It was
Wow.
a basic training center. It was the headquarters of the Armor School. So all of the officers that we mingled with in the housing area, aside from physicians and dentists, were, for the most part, um, regular Army armor officers, most of whom had rotated through Germany when we had tank divisions over there during the Cold War. So it was a pleasant year living there.
So you there for a year?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then you were stationed to Vietnam.
We came back to New York for a family wedding. Got a telephone call to report back immediately to Fort Knox. Why? We'll tell you when you get back. Do I have time to drive back with my family? Yes. Got back to Fort Knox, and then hung around for a month. So sort of typical Army hurry up and wait. And got my orders at that point to go to Fort Meade in Maryland, where our hospital was being assembled. So there were several of us from Fort Knox who went. There was another surgeon, a nurse anesthetist, a couple of nurses. And we all, among many others, assembled at Fort Meade in Maryland, and we were there for several weeks.
There was no Vietnam event to trigger all this. This was just
Not a
continuation program.
Well, this was, of course, so this was summer 1965,
Okay.
and that was the time that the big buildup of
Yes.
forces was going on in Vietnam. So, of course, we didn't know what we were going to be assigned to. We were just told we're going to be going somewhere. We got a clue when they issued us sunglasses and combat fatigues,
Okay.
jungle fatigues, I should say, that we were going to some warm climate with a lot of sun. So we were there for a couple of weeks, as I say. That was where the unit that I was assigned to was assembled. It was the 3rd Surgical Mobile Army Hospital. You know it as a MASH. And people came from all over the country. It was a collection of physicians and nurses and medical corps people and medical service officers. And we were there for a while. Then they transported all of us to Oakland Army Terminal, which is where the ship was that we were assigned to head off past the Pacific. So we sat in Oakland for a few days while other units came to the ship. The ship itself was a World War II troop transport. It didn't have a lot of luxury cruise type facilities, to say the very least. So we hung out there for several days. They wouldn't let us off the ship, sitting there looking at the San Francisco skyline across the bay. And a number of units showed up, one of which was a combat engineering regiment. And as I recall, there was also a military police organization collected. And another little anecdote, we were ready to embark one morning, and a friend of mine, one of the colleagues from Fort Knox and I were on the deck overlooking the pier, and a bus pulled up with a band. A military band got out and started playing martial music on the pier. Officers from the ship and officers from the shore were giving a report to each other, obviously. And then they're pulling up the gangplank, and the ship is starting to back away from the pier. And I said to my colleague, "This is a lot like a World War II movie with John Wayne, except we're in it."
You didn't know you were going to be able to
No, and of course they still hadn't told us where we were going. I mean, we just
you figure you pretty
we were hoping we were going to Midway or Guam, or Hawaii, but no, we're going to Vietnam. 19 days across the Pacific to Subic Bay in the Philippines. Boring and hot. It was August, and the sun was pretty powerful, and the ship was all steel. It would bake during the day and then radiate the heat during the night. It was really miserable. It was particularly miserable for the troops who were down in the lower decks. We were up on an upper deck.
And once again, you were an officer. You
right.
You were, quote, first class, traveling first class.
Right. And finally, they allowed the troops to get out during the night and sleep up on the deck. And there was one night there I was uncomfortably hot, so I got up, and it was the middle of the night. It was starlit. You cannot imagine the play of the stars when you're out in the Pacific and there's no light anywhere except starlight. It's extraordinarily beautiful. But anyways, quiet, just the rush of the water past the bow of the ship. And there were bodies laying all over the decks, and it looked like, like a ghost ship. All these soldiers there sound asleep on the decks. It was quite a sight. Anyway, 19 days to Subic Bay. One day there, a Cinderella Liberty, they used to call it in the service, I guess in the Second War. Meaning got off the ship and you better be back by midnight. And then we sailed from Subic, and we made multiple stops along the Vietnamese coast. One of the stops, the first stop, they told us to, gear up and be ready to disembark the ship. And we were all up early in the morning with our, whatever gear we had to carry with us. And at the last moment, they told us to stand down, that we're not getting off there. So it turns out that the combat engineers were getting off there, and their assignment was up in the Central Highlands to establish a base for the Air Cavalry Division that was going to be coming over to Vietnam, and they were going to an unsecured area. So our mission, which originally was to support them medically, was changed because we had women in our unit. We had nurses. So we were originally assigned to a pretty dangerous area, but they had changed our assignment. And so we kept on the ship for another couple of days. And then we finally got off at the mouth of the Saigon River, went up the river to Saigon, transported by buses about 15 or 20 miles or so to the base where they had finally decided where we would be, which was in Bien Hoa, Binhoa, small villagey type town, but on the largest tactical air base in Vietnam. That base had been built by the French during the French Indochina War, and now was taken over by the United States Air Force. And it was in an area called the Iron Triangle. So the pilots would get shot at by the Viet Cong, taken off and landing on the airstrip. So our unit was there to support the 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was there to clear the Iron Triangle. So that was our base for the next year.
You've said at Fort Meade, and maybe I took you too literally, a hospital was being assembled. You mean the personnel?
Personnel.
You went in a building that was already equipped to be a hospital, or
No, no, no. It was personnel. The equipment that we had already been shipped
okay?
over to Vietnam, but we didn't know that. But that was the case.
So you were like the first staff of this new hospital, or quote new hospital facility.
I don't know the history of the third surge, as it was called, whether they had been in Korea or World War II. They may well, they wouldn't have been in World War II because we didn't have MASH hospitals, but we did have MASH hospitals in Korea, and obviously the famous program about MASH.
So basically, you were an emergency room.
Pretty
So
much. Patients, soldiers who had been injured would be flown in by helicopter. Here's another anecdote, one of the favorite. We had just gotten there, and the hospital was assembled in tents in what had been an old dried up rice paddy, and this huge base. I mean, we were surrounded, as I said, by 173rd Airborne Brigade, an air base, the Prince of Wales Light Horse Infantry Regiment from Australia, the military from the Vietnamese Army. So it was a very, very large organization. So in the midst of all of this, they set us down and put up our tents. There had been concrete landing pads created for the helicopters with big red crosses painted on them. And the tents, of course, hospital tents had red crosses painted on the top. Well, we weren't ready to work yet, but somebody had let it be known that we were there. And one helicopter had taken some fire. Their gunner had taken a wound right through his thigh, through some big vessels. And the pilot knew that the hospital was there. Rather than heading down to Saigon, he came, and they did what they call a combat landing, in which they come in and they're kind of on an angle. So the wash of the helicopters going like that, and then they sort of flop down. Well, the wash headed directly to the latrine tent. So this big 50-foot tent
it's blown away.
is blown away, except it's sitting in there is one of our Puerto Rican sergeants. So can imagine, I don't know all the words because it was in Spanish, but he had a few words to say about what's going on here. So that's another one. There were crazy incidents that occurred throughout the year.
Your hopefully it should not have been, but was your hospital complex ever attacked or any combat duty around there?
No, we were never under fire. There was one night that we were woken up by a lot of fire out on the perimeter, and thought maybe something's going on. And then everybody I mean, you can see the tracer bullets flying everywhere, and then suddenly you realize, well, it was Tet, and the Vietnamese army was celebrating the New Year. So no, as far as I know, we never came under any fire.
How was your morale and the morale of the people you work with there?
Oh, I think it was pretty good. Everybody missed being home, of course, but we knew we had a mission.
Yeah, you were providing a very needed service
to take care of injured soldiers, and we had I would say, an extraordinary year. We had, in the time I was there, we had about 1,000 casualties come in. Well, I was there for about 10 months. And our hospital mortality was 1%. So part of that was a tribute to the fact that the guys would be picked up by the medevac helicopters and brought to us very quickly from wherever they were being injured. But a bunch of very skillful surgeons who I was working with, who knew how to do what needed to be done.
Good story. Obviously, in the occupation you have, you're always under a lot of stress, but any more than normal? Compare that to being back in the States in a hospital or your practice.
I don't really think so. I mean, other than the strangeness of being in that setting, being in a war, being away from home, And there were periods of nothing's going on. For whatever reason, the bad guys didn't want to fight that week or whatever. And then it would get chaotic because there was some action and we would get swamped. So during those boring times that, boredom is not a great experience. We got um, out of the hospital periodically since we were fairly close to Saigon. The commanding officer would let a few of us out at any one time so that the hospital could still function if there were casualties coming in. So we got down to Saigon fairly, a number of times anyway, and that was a nice relief. And to check into one of the hotels. I've been back. The hotel is still there.
Was further question, but
It was nice to have a real shower. Oh, I'll tell you about the showers. There's another anecdote.
Please do.
There's the craziness that goes on you've watched the MASH series on TV, and let me tell you, there's a lot of truth in what was going on there. But so the showers, wooden platforms, canvas sides, and a wooden frame. And on top of it, somehow the hospital had wrangled fuel tanks from jet aircraft that were probably surplus, and put screwed shower heads into a hole, and trucks would come in the morning and fill them with water. And so if you wanted a cold shower, you had a shower in the morning. And if you wanted a hot shower, you waited until 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun did the job for you and you had a hot shower. Well, shortly after we got there, we noticed that there was a helicopter company not too far from where we were. And they were kind of hovering over the hospital longer than they needed to get to their spot. Well, they soon realized that they had not covered the top of the girls' shower. So hospital buildings, not the barracks buildings. And it was monsoon season was extraordinary. I mean, we've experienced some pretty heavy rains here in the Midwest, but you haven't seen anything until you've seen the downpours. There was one incident when we were still in tents. The mess tents were on one side of a road, and the rest of the hospital was on another side of the road. The road was just a cut in dirt, basically. And when the rains came, this would be a small river, and one of our enlisted men tried to get across, and he just got swept down like you do now in the Merrimack or one of the other rivers if you're not careful. So we had weather. I mean, South Vietnam is hot and humid pretty much all the year. The only relief that we really had from that was, I think it was in February. We got there in August. In February, they moved us. All of our equipment, all of our vehicles, all of our personnel by cargo aircraft, C-130s, up to the central highlands of the country, which is quite beautiful. Jungle-covered hills and mountains, but much cooler and much more pleasant as far as the weather. They parked us by an airstrip in a town called Ban Mi Thuot, which had been the royal hunting area of the kings of Vietnam. And we were there to support an action. This was on pretty close to the border. And we were there to support an action by the 25th Infantry Division. Jungle Lightning, I think they're called. They still exist. Well, that month, the Viet Cong decided they weren't interested in fighting, so they had melted across the border. So again, we're sitting up there doing not a heck of a lot. So a couple of things that one recalls about that. One was in town, there were a group of missionaries, American Christian missionaries, who had set up a hospital out of town to take care of Vietnamese people with leprosy. And since we were there, they asked us if we could help them, and of course we could. We weren't doing anything, and so we said we would go out to their hospital and work there, and they said, "You can't go out to the hospital and work there. It belongs to the other guys. The area does, but we'll bring the patients in." So the Viet Cong were allowing them to move these Vietnamese who were suffering with leprosy. So we had an opportunity to do some surgical procedures for some of these folks. And of course, for a young American physician, all of us, to have an opportunity to see leprosy is something that you wouldn't have except in an experience like that somewhere in Southeast Asia or India or places where leprosy is so common. So that was one interesting thing. And the other event that occurred, which was kind of a funny and yet not so funny, a C-130 came in to the airstrip and didn't make his stopping adequately and went off the end of the runway. Nobody was hurt, but the plane obviously was damaged. And because of that event, a number of reporters showed up to, just cover that story. So while the reporters were there, some of us got an opportunity to speak to the reporters about the fact that our equipment for vascular surgery, which was a major need, putting blood vessels, major